I think most brands and community managers consider the employee to actually be community members. So you have to think about, how can I make sure that everyone is benefiting from their interactions with the brand? You can't be one thing to one group and then try to present a different face to others, because it's not going to work. Your reputation has to be the same in all areas, because your internal employees are going to be discussing your brand and impacting the brand reputation just as much as customers, or maybe even more so, because people are going to say, this person knows what's going on behind the scenes. They are a great resource for me to decide if they're walking what they're talking, if their values are actually something that they don't just preach to us. So treating everyone in the community with the same sort of respect and the same priority is really important.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, where we talk about everything you need to know to build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering company employees to be powerful advocates of the company brand. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and today we'll be talking about building community and why you need to include company employees in your brand's community building strategy. Yes, it's going to be a very interesting conversation, but before we meet my awesome guest, if you're looking for more practical resources and powerful perspectives about building a great company culture, then the Happy Monday Club is the place for you. Every Monday, the team over at Workshop puts together an inspiring and uplifting list of articles from some of the world's best workplaces, along with their latest internal marketing and communication templates, and of course, the occasional giveaway or surprise. The Happy Monday Club newsletter is designed to help you create a positive, supported, impactful culture at any company size. So join over 10,000 culture-focused leaders today and sign up at happymondayclub.com. And of course, the Happy Monday Club is hosted by Workshop, who is my Season 2 sponsor. Thanks, Workshop. Happy to have you on board. Now, without further ado, let's dive right into this episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast, where we flip the marketing conversation from external to internal, talking about how we can engage and empower our company employees to become advocates of the brand. And of course, all my guests are awesome, but I'm very, very excited to have this guest here with me today. She is Chantelle Marcelle. And if you are a marketer on LinkedIn or on Twitter especially, and you don't know Chantelle, you need to get to know her. She is one of the awesome marketing voices on those platforms, spewing valuable content every day. She's got a newsletter. We're going to hear all about that a little later on. But she and I are connected on LinkedIn. I think that's where we first connected. And then on Twitter. And it's just been great following your awesome content. She's also a podcast host, as well as being a marketing consultant. And she's a mom. I don't know how she fits it all in, but she's awesome at it all. Chantelle, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm very happy to meet you like this.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I feel all pumped up. That intro was amazing. I need to save that. And
you deserved it. And you know what, Chantelle? I thought of you for this particular conversation. Of course, you launched your podcast a few months back, and the word community, of course, was what popped out in the title of it, Marketing Talks. And I think community is so very important. Well, as you know, the conversations that are happening in the marketing space on LinkedIn and on Twitter especially, about the importance of community and community building as a key part of growth and brand building generally. Of course, when I talk about internal marketing and we talk about engaging company employees in the process of building brand and driving growth, those employees are individuals with their own communities, yes, but as the people and the representatives of the company brand, as I like to say, they have to be a key part, in my view, of building community around the company brand. But we're going to dig into that a little bit because I think maybe some people have some questions around, well, what's this whole thing called community. So the term community and community building, of course, is a big part of certain conversations. It's gaining increased traction. But could you, Chantelle, just start out by defining what community means in the context of a company brand now? How do you define what a community is in the context of a company brand?
I think that the word community wasn't as common in brand marketing and for companies prior to the pandemic. So it was prevalent. Some people did talk about it. There were Salesforce communities and some tools that you could use to gather like customers and such. But it got really huge during the pandemic when people realized the importance of bringing together your customers or prospects, people with common interest, just to really support each other and to really benefit each other. And so I think that that's probably a really good definition, just bringing together people with a common purpose, mission, values, goals, and then fostering a sense of collaboration, sharing, and development.
It's such a powerful concept because, as you say, when you're bringing together like-minded people, people with a common sense of purpose, goals, and collaborating, it just speaks power to me because that's so much more powerful than maybe one or even two people trying to go at it on their own. The follow-up question to that then is because I think it's important for companies to take note of that point, Chantelle, because if we're talking about bringing together like-minded people around a common purpose, a common goal for the purpose of collaboration, for the betterment of everybody in the community, I think it's important for company brands to take note of it because if you talk about the traditional view of what marketing is as a company brand, I just kind of put my thing out there. I'm supposed to do my research, understand who my customers are, make sure that my product uniquely solves their problems, perhaps better than anybody else in the space. So I guess maybe for some companies, they're thinking, why do I even need to be concerned about building a community? Why is that even important? And I think it's important for brands to take stock and say, well, is community building or should it be a part of our strategy going forward? Why do you think companies need to even put community building as part of their strategic focus when they talk about marketing?
Well, I think one of the primary reasons is one that you kind of touched on just now. Gets you really in touch and really close with your customers and prospects so that you can start building that relationship and really understanding them on a deeper level. You get unprecedented access to these individuals just by having them gather in one place and having these conversations and discussions, really unique touch points that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have if you were just on a sales call with them or trying to get them on a webinar or something like that. I think it also helps you to shape your brand identity, helps you to get that out there, help people to get to know what your brand is all about. And then you're also building ambassadors, people who are going to carry your message and carry that mission externally.
And beyond some of the benefits which you've already begun to highlight for us, what would you say are the characteristics of our effective community would look like for a company brand? So even if I, as a company, I'm like, yeah, I want to build a community, what in your mind should they have as kind of their checklist to know, well, this is a great community, or what are we shooting for, targeting when we're talking about building an effective community in support of the brand?
You really have to think about your brand and your DNA, and you want the community experience to align with that. So you want people to look at their experience, and that's going to reflect on your brand and who you are. And it's going to help build your reputation. They're going to take that with them and remember that, and then share that with others or think about that when they're making their buying decisions. So it really helps to build an identity externally for your brand.
It's so powerful what you're saying. And the thought that I have in my head is, where would this have all come from? I mean, do you have any idea? I know you've been having tons of conversations, even through your own podcast, with folks on the whole matter of building communities. And while I think we've grasped the power and the necessity of communities as people, do you know where this whole idea of community building around brands came from? what kind of was the catalyst for that? Have you been able to pick up anything on the ground based on your own conversations and research?
That's a good one. I should actually start asking people when I interview them. But a lot of times, the present times, we focus a lot on virtual communities and communities within the digital spaces, just because that's become so huge. And that's what really exploded over the past 2 years ish since the pandemic started, because we were all forced online. And so we had to really innovate in this area. I think communities have been around for much, much longer. People for very long have looked at their purchases and the brands that you wear as an extension of your identity. People buying like Apple products, people buying Nokia, Samsung, whatever. People looked at that as something that was deeply personal to them. Like I've got a Samsung phone, or I've got an Apple phone, or even the Apple PC conversations, the Mac versus PC, that commercial that they used to have where it was like, this is a Mac user, this is a PC user. And those communities have always sort of naturally formed just because, it's a way that when we buy something, that purchase we feel often reflects on us as an individual.
Yeah. And as you said there, this pandemic, I think really, I agree with you, has really put this concept of community even more so to the forefront. When you talk about everybody sheltering in place in lockdown, it was a whole reality that I don't think any of us ever anticipated. And recognizing that even in our own spaces and having to go online to build that human connection, not only as individuals, but brands recognized its importance even more so. You started to call a couple of brand names, but in your looking across the landscape, do you know what brands in your view, or can you share what brands in your view are doing community building very well?
When I first started thinking about community, I always thought back to like video games and gaming, because those were and for a lot of people these days, especially millennials or digital natives, those video games and provided the first opportunity to get a sense of community and to gain an awareness of that, because you would play those games and interact with people and you felt some sort of bond there. And so the video game community really has done a great job of leveraging that community building aspect. Now, previously, they have not done such a good job, and they've provided a model for what not to do when it comes to building inclusive communities. So making sure not to allow toxicity to seep in and become part of, when people talk about video game communities, a lot of time that toxicity will come up like, oh, well, they're generally misogynistic. There's a lot of racism. So that's a negative aspect that I think we've seen a lot of them start to work on and talk about. But I think other industries have been able to look at what's happened there and use that as inspiration or a model for how they approach community building for their own business. A lot of talk about the metaverse and how people will start to do a lot more of their interactions and life in general online and digital spaces. And I think a lot of that started with games, Second Life or The Sims or Roblox, etc. And now we're able to take those things, the virtual concerts they were doing, etc., and we can then apply that to conferences or other experiences that we'll be able to translate into something online. To name a few companies that are not in the video game space that are really leading the way when it comes to community building, I would say HubSpot, Salesforce. Those are the two that really come to mind, especially as a marketer, just because they do a really great job of gathering their customers, their users, and leveraging those relationships with them to spread outward, I believe, to create somewhat of an aspirational branding strategy where people are like, oh, cool. Like, look at all that Salesforce swag, or look at that HubSpot swag, and look at, what all these HubSpot users are doing. I want to be involved with that. I want to be a part of that. And they do a great job of also taking care of their users and making their customers feel really valued.
I agree. I mean, based on what I see, I totally agree with that HubSpot, Salesforce. And what would you say, I guess, is what I like to coin the secret sauce of those company brands that have strong communities? Because we know what they're doing tactically, externally. We can see, as you mentioned, a couple of names there because of the events and the experiences that they create. I see those kind of as the outputs. But I guess without too much information on what's happening on the inside of those companies, because we don't work there. But do you know if there's perhaps some kind of secret sauce, as far as you can tell from your perspective, of those company brands that have strong communities? What's really enabling them to do that and build that?
I think they're so customer first. Like you can tell straight away that they really value the customers. They put them first. They're actively taking feedback. They're actively looking for ways to improve the customer experiences and make them better over time. I started using HubSpot and Salesforce just to go back to them years ago. And looking at the development since then, it's remarkable how many things that they've introduced or implemented that many of us were complaining about back in the day. So to see them be responsive in that way is great. Also, they focus on both their internal and external communities very well. They take care of their internal team to the point where whenever I interact with someone who works for one of those companies, they're bragging about working there. They're so excited to talk about the brand. It's actually very strong part of their identity and not in a negative way. So the fact that they've got evangelists in their employees and then also in their customers, it really speaks volumes about who they are and what they stand for.
And that latter part of your response is a great segue because, of course, being customer first is awesome because you're talking about building those external communities. Because as the founder of the company that I work for used to say, unfortunately, she passed many years ago, but she was known for saying all the time that it's the customers why we get to eat. If we don't have
Yep.
customers buying stuff, we might as well go home. We won't have anything to come back to. So I get that. And I appreciate the fact that you've highlighted that for those brands that are doing community very well, which is the focus of this discussion and this podcast, is they're very big on their internal stakeholders as well, aka their employees, because at the end of the day, HubSpot is really just like a platform. Who are the people behind that, providing that experience, the design, the service, the sales? It's the people. And ensuring that they're driving their internal communities as well, I think is a very powerful point. From your perspective, then, what would you say is the role that employees can play? So, yeah, we have a company, we have an offering, whether it be a physical product, a technology platform. But as I said before, it's the people behind it, behind the company. What would you say is the role that employees can or should be playing in the whole process of building a community around the company brand?
I think most brands and community managers consider the employee to actually be community members. So I'm not sure there's much value in differentiating to an extreme degree your employee versus community member X, because you want the experience to be really enjoyable and powerful to both of them and to serve both of their needs. So you have to think about, how can I make sure that everyone is benefiting from their interactions with the brand? You can't be one thing to one group and then, try to present a different face to others, because it's not going to work. Your reputation has to be the same in all areas, because your internal employees are going to be talking and discussing your brand and impacting the brand reputation just as much as customers, or maybe even more so, because people are going to say, this person knows what's going on behind the scenes. They are great resource for me to decide if they're actually walking what they're talking, if their values are actually something that they don't just preach to us. So treating everyone in the community with the same sort of respect and the same priority is really important.
I'm with you on that one. It's so very, very important. And I think a lot of companies undervalue that. They see the constituents as different, internal and external. And I understand why. But as you rightly say, for those companies that do a great job of building community, there is that connecting point between the external and the internal, where if your employees aren't happy, they don't feel like they're being treated with respect, they're not onboarded in the purpose and the mission and the vision of the company brand, then when they're sharing, when they're talking with their own little communities that they have, then obviously it's not gonna line up. It's not gonna be seen as authentic. Following on that, Chantelle, in all the conversations that I've been having throughout this podcast series that I've been doing on internal marketing, it always leads to the vantage point of employee advocacy or employee brand advocacy, or some people call it employee social media advocacy. And what it really is, I mean, for some of us who are not quite clear on it yet, it's really about how company brands can leverage their employees in their own network. So again, I have Chantelle, who could be an employee of company A. And obviously, Chantelle has her family and her friends as her own little network and community. She's on social media. Is there a way for us to engage and empower Chantelle to create or curate valuable content to share with her community, with the expectation that to the extent that she does it very well, then the company brand gets to come along for the ride? Some companies do it where they mandate it. That's a whole other conversation. Some companies really just empower the employee to say, hey, talk about whatever you want. Talk about your dog, talk about your kid, that's fine. And some companies say, well, kind of keep it within a particular lane. But the point of the matter is it's really about how do we engage, and that's what internal market is. And internal marketing is engaging employees and empowering them to ultimately become advocates of the brand. Well, first of all, do you see employee advocacy as having a role in community building for company brands based on what you've been picking up online and seeing what companies who do well at community building have been doing? Have you been seeing what seems to be deliberate or focused efforts to have the employees speak about the brand or speak in a way that benefits the company brand and builds a community around it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially for brands that are just starting out and are just starting to build that, set the groundwork for a community to be built. The internal team, the employees are going to be really the first community members and the first evangelists. And you want to have them be as excited and pumped to be there as possible, because that passion and excitement is contagious. So if they're in there and they're active and they're participating in discussions and they're creating discussion, sharing content, sharing stories, talking about your brand from an expert level, that's going to create an even better experience for everyone else who's joining. It's going to help inspire other people to take courage and to start participating even more. One of the hardest things about community is keeping the engagement level going, because people join and then it's kind of like, what next? What do I do? And that's always a hard thing for brands, because you have to actively be pushing people to participate and to be doing things just to keep the community thriving and alive, to give people a reason to keep coming back and to engage. So having your employees in there and just sort of naturally excited and sharing things and helping with that very tough task can be tremendously advantageous to the success of your community.
And we're agreed on that one. This is a podcast for that. And I just want to just add to what you just shared. It comes at a fraction of the cost.
Right.
So when we talk about as marketers and even just as brands, company brands generally, it can really be a very expensive proposition when you talk about, again, companies, especially just starting out, and they're not coming to the table with a lot of resources to do a lot of stuff. Having your employees to be that voice, to bring different conversations, especially to social media platforms like a LinkedIn, like a Twitter, it can be very, very powerful. And again, at a fraction of the cost. When we marketers always have that budget struggle happening sometimes, but it can be so very powerful. And I'd like to add authentic as well, because again, to the extent that your employees are happy, they're engaged, they're really proud, as it were, to speak about the brand that they work for, I think it's awesome. But that said then, Chantelle, what are some of the practical ways? Because I guess, for some marketers who are listening, especially, so they're logged into the idea that community building is a powerful way to build brand and drive growth. Having your internal stakeholders, your employees on board with that and leveraging and engaging them and empowering them to be able to support the community building efforts of the company brand. But to the extent that marketers are now like, yeah, I want to do this for my company. What are some of the practical steps that, in your view, a company brand can take when they want to take that step or start that journey of engaging employees in the whole community building process for the benefit of the company brand?
Listening first is really important, because when a brand community comes from a place of selfishness, where the brand is clearly just trying to take advantage of a group or use it as a channel, an extra sales channel, or an extra place to push marketing with no value offered to the actual community itself and the community members itself, it's really apparent. And I think it really turns people off from not only participating in the community, but also interacting with your brand in the future in general. So I think listening to all of the potential stakeholders, listening to your internal employees, listening to your customers, and a great place to do that is existing communities. So social media is a great first step for building a community, because your community members are already there and they're already having conversations and they're already participating and engaging in certain ways that you can learn from, and then translate that into a better experience for your brand community. So I think just a lot of listening and research is the best way to start things off, so that you can begin to intentionally build with the purpose of providing value in order to keep people coming back.
Thank you. Listening. Yeah, very powerful. And I like the fact that you highlighted looking at existing communities and listening there as well to understand what their pain points are, what they're talking about, what solutions do they, what problems are they trying to solve, I would like to say, and seeing how you can deliver on that through valuable content. Chantelle, this has been a great discussion. Coming down to the end, well, I know we've discussed a lot here today, and from your perspective, what is the key takeaway? I always like to ask all my guests this question. What's the key takeaway or the most important nugget that you think our listeners should come away with, having heard everything that we would have discussed today?
I would say just that communities reflect on your brand in a tremendous way. So making sure to be very intentional, very conscious about the experience that you're creating is more important than any other aspect, because people are going to remember the way that you treated them and the way that you made them feel or whatever in that community when it comes time to make purchases. So I would say that's probably the number one thing. I did an interview of a really great community builder. His name is David Spinks, co-founder of CMX. And he had mentioned that one of the best pieces of advice that he could offer is starting with diversity in mind and inclusion right from the start. Because if you start building and you're not thinking about how do I attract people who don't just look like and think like me right from the start, by the time you've actually gotten an established community and you look around and you realize, oh my gosh, it's kind of an echo chamber in here, that, there isn't really any diversity, it's going to be much harder to reverse that when everything is already in full swing. It's harder to then go and try to build diversity and inclusion into the experience after you've already gotten started. So that's kind of a good thing, especially these days, to think about right from the start. How can I make sure that there is sufficient diversity of experience, diversity of thought, and diversity of people who are engaging in the community? Because you're going to have a much richer community, much more knowledge, much more benefit to everyone if you do have that diversity present.
Excellent reminder on that. Thank you so much, Chantelle. Yeah, it has to be diverse, and just making sure that everyone feels like they've been heard and that the solution that you're providing or whatever it is you're providing that's value added speaks into their situation and speaks into their reality. I think it's an awesome reminder and an awesome point. Chantelle, thank you so much for your time and for your sharing and for your expertise. It's been wonderful. I would love to close out, as I do with all my awesome guests, by asking, how can we in the internal marketing tribe, how can we support you?
Yeah, so just hop onto my website. Love to hear from anybody who listens, get any feedback or thoughts from you guys. You can reach me directly through my website. As links to all of my different social profiles and my email. It's Chantelle Marcelle, my first name, my last name.com. So yeah, I'd love to hear from everyone.
Awesome. And you have a great newsletter as well.
I do. So I'm still coming up with a name for it right now. It's just called kind of Chantelle's marketing newsletter. I am awful at naming things, but I like to send out helpful tips, resources. I'm a big fan. I've worked for a lot of small businesses and startups where resources were very limited. So I have a wealth of knowledge about free or very cost-effective ways to accomplish a lot in marketing. So I love sending out that kind of stuff, as well as, cool brand examples or campaigns that I see that I think are inspiring and would provide hopefully some inspiration for innovation in different ways. So
awesome. And your podcast, which you've taken it up a notch, the name of it is
Marketing Talks, Companies and Communities. And it's all about community and how community is inspiring growth. Because a lot of times I think brands are a little bit reluctant to put the resources into community because they're not sure that it's actually going to have significant ROI. So I talk to people about, how are you finding the ROI in community building? How are you maximizing the ROI?
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I know you have tons of episodes there, guys. So we're going to include the links to everything in the show notes so you can find Chantelle and follow her, guys. Follow her on LinkedIn and on Twitter. When we talk about providing valuable content, that's Chantelle. We really appreciate you. As a marketer, I can say, Chantelle, I appreciate you and all of the great value that you provide to our marketing community. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. I could not wait to talk to you. I'm so glad we took it off of LinkedIn.
Yes, as am I. And hopefully one day when you're ready to soak up some sun on the beach here in Jamaica, the jerk chicken is on me.
Don't threaten me with a good time. I'll be there tomorrow.
No problem. I love a good time. Well, thank you so much, Chantelle. Have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are. And we appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope that you've gotten some valuable takeaways from today's discussion. And if you found it valuable, then please, I invite you as always to share it with someone who you believe will find it valuable as well. If you're not already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, please join the family. The podcast is available on your favorite podcasting app. Thank you again for listening. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.